ये रेडियो पाकिस्तान पॉडकास्ट है।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Imran Javed from the podcast studios of Radio Pakistan, Islamabad. Today we are just going to talk with a literati and a multifaceted personality, and he is from UK, and Mr. Kaleem Hussain is a British writer, multidisciplinary change management consultant and geopolitical observer with an interest in the intersection of religion in public life, politics and international relations. And today that we are just going to talk with the literati of his newly published book, that is Peace, Reconciliation in International Relations and Islamic Law. This is a very important thing that we must inculcate, and the rest of the world must know about the sanctity of these understanding of the conflicts and as well as their proper resolution. So first of all, Kaleem Sahab, I do welcome you from the podcast studios of Radio Pakistan.
Thank you very much for your welcoming to your
Okay,
program.
how do
Thank
you
very
feel
much.
in UK, and what sort of thing that you are doing nowadays?
I'm feeling good. Thank you very much. I work a lot in change management,
Okay.
and as you mentioned in the introduction,
Okay,
in transformation in the public and private sector, and I'm also working as part of a peace and reconciliation
okay,
initiative. So I'm part of a lot of different organizations that work to facilitate peace and reconciliation, not only nationally but also internationally too.
yes, you're honorary fellow at the Edward Cadbury Center for the Public Understanding of Religion, University of Birmingham, and many multifaceted facets that you have, and it would be very pertinent for the spectators and the podcast viewers of Radio Pakistan, certainly, to come to know all the reciprocate things and the measures that you have mentioned in your book. So first of all, let us know about the story of peace and reconciliation in international relations and Islamic law. That is your newly published book, please.
Well, thank you very much for introducing my book for your audience, and thank you, and assalamu alaikum to your audience in Pakistan also.
Walaikum salam.
The premise of the book is, when I started looking into it, was that we have a lot of conflicts around the world, in different guises. So in recent years we've seen situations in obviously Syria, we've seen situations in Yemen.
Yeah.
And just now, more recently, we have the situation in the Russia and Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And then historically, obviously, we had it's coming to South Asia. You have the situation in Afghanistan, and then Kashmir,
Okay.
and Palestine, and Israel.
Yes.
So these are theaters of conflict, and people look at these and sometimes say these are use terms like forever wars or never-ending wars. That these have been going on for so many years, and
Yeah.
there seems to be no resolution or pathway to find a solution for these. But intertwined in these conflicts is the role of religion, or what they call religiosity. It's always there. Now, depending on how that is used. So this is the thing that really intrigued me to look into writing this book. So the methodology is looking at the rules of international law,
Okay.
looking at the rules of Islamic law,
Hmm.
and looking at the similarities and differences in these two systems, and then looking to see in these theaters of conflict, in particular, Palestine, Israel, then you've got Afghanistan and Kashmir, how can they be used to facilitate, peaceful resolutions?
Okay.
And do these rules help the situation, or do they hinder the situation when they are utilized? So that was the premise of writing the book. Yes.
That is the very foundation of the book as well, and that you have narrated all the things and the resolutions been given in your very particular book. Because we see that the principles of peace and reconciliation are important in both international law and Islamic law. And we know that international law mostly emphasizes upon the peaceful resolutions of the dispute between the states and provide mechanism for mediation and negotiations and arbitration, between the states. And obviously the Islamic law, on the other hand, obviously emphasizes about the importance of forgiveness, compassion, tranquility, humility, and between the individuals and the communities, and encourages the use of peaceful means to resolve conflicts. Because these two things, one thing is very concrete in very jurisprudence and laws and all that, and on the other side that we have compassion and forgiveness and tranquility of understanding and peace and spiritual things. So
Yes.
these two things are just mingling in your very particular understanding of writing this book. So how do you think that, futuristically Islamic law and international law have some, pertinent relative narratives as well?
Thank you very much for that. So on this point, when you look at international law, you have principles of justice, you
Okay.
have principles of international humanitarian law.
Yeah.
You have, as you touched on the different tools, you have arbitration, conflict resolution, reconciliation, remedies, use of force. All these principles exist in international law, and they've been used, either, an analyst will discuss whether they've been used appropriately or inappropriately. And
Okay.
similarly, within Islamic law, we have principles of self-defense. Within our tradition, we have principles of adl. We have hukuk Allah, hukuk al-ibad.
Yeah.
Respect for the rights of people and respect, and then the rules of engagements of war
Yeah.
within Islamic law. When can a state go into war, and what are the parameters of when they engaged? What is allowed during the rules of warfare and the engagement of warfare? Self-defense, and when you're dealing with the enemies, non-combatants.
Yeah.
Treating of women, treating of the elderly, the frail, the timings of offensives. All this is covered within the interface of Islamic law. In terms of, to answer your question,
Yeah.
when I've been looking into my book and the analysis, what I found is the high rights principle, the ethics that exist in international law and Islamic law. There are a lot of synergies between them, as I already touched on: human rights, humanity, compassion, etc.
Yes.
And some of the differences, just give me one more moment, and I will mention one of the differences. Sometimes is the dignity of the dead.
Okay.
Sometimes when you have warfare, sadly, we have seen in places in other conflicts like Abu Ghraib, what happened in Iraq many years ago, that the people, in terms of how the bodies are dealt with and mutilated, this is totally inconsonant with the norms of international law.
It's like the massacre and the pogrom that we have seen as well.
That's correct. So, and this is something which Islamic law is very strong on, in terms of having the rights of burial for people and the dignity for the dead. This is something which I mentioned in my book.
Like the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has shown the compassion towards the prisoners, and we have seen in the Ghazawat of the Islamic history as well. The same thing that you feel that there must be the part of Islamic law as well, and to just practice it and experience it for the positive means as well.
That's correct. Indeed. That's correct. Yes.
Yes, that's good. So, there's another question, because this book is, I think, that the very important document at the moment for the rest of the world to must understand the sanctity of Islamic law and compatibility with international law, and to create the compassion for the rest of the suffering humanity. So, the concept of peace and reconciliation and international and Islamic law, you have mentioned briefly and very enthusiastically rather. So what would be the legal mechanism available at the moment in international law and Islamic law to promote peace and reconciliation? Because it's a spiritual sort of thought, and this particular rapprochement, unless that we will not create, we will not achieve that zenith and the goal and the destination as well.
So in terms of international law, as I mentioned, there's the rules of engagement that exist in the ethics of international law. And when it comes to arbitration and mediation, I think this is an area where, international law can play a really pivotal role. Okay. Now, within this rubric, you have a situation where people are questioning the role of organizations such as the United Nations in this new world order. We've had the era of Trump, where a lot of international organizations were not being given a lot of respect. But during the Biden administration, we have seen a bit more emphasis on the United Nations as an overarcher and a player within the arbitration framework.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. Into the mediation, we have mediatory bodies within the United Nations. Okay. We have peacekeeping bodies within the United Nations that help facilitate peace and resolution. And I visited the United Nations office recently.
Okay.
And they have what they call a mediation chamber.
Okay.
Which exists within the apparatus within the United Nations. And what that chamber does is it brings disputing parties who are at odds with each other to the table together. And the environment is created where they're able to have a facilitative and meaningful dialogue in the appropriate environment.
Okay.
And then to be able to iron out some of the differences. So this is something which, again, the chambers within the United Nations and international law enable you to do that in terms of facilitating that and dialogue is critical. And then within the Islamic legal system, we have within our tradition, is quite obviously evident that when any party comes to you and with the word to incline towards peace, you open your doors to dialogue. You open the door. So that principle is always there. And
Yes.
another very important principle within the difference between, I think it's important to mention, is that in Islamic law, there is the principle of restorative justice.
Okay.
And sometimes you see in international law, which is retributive justice, which political actors sadly use as a vengeance. So I'll give you an example. We had, as a result of 9/11,
Yes.
they need to, get revenge on a certain country. They go and attack Afghanistan.
Yeah.
That's retribution. In
Yes.
Islamic law, it's about restorative justice. And what that means is it's about bringing healing.
Yes.
It's about bringing peace and compassion.
Mhm.
And there are examples which I can touch on, in our conversation, hopefully. But that's a very important fundamental difference. Sometimes
Very right.
which you see the difference. Yeah.
Very right. Because, Kaleem Saab, that we have seen the Sulh Hudaybiyah, Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and as well as Misaq-e Medina, because the very important documents, the basis of Islamic law, and as well as the great vision of Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the world has seen the approach and the things that still we are exercising. So as well as the current stance of Kashmir, Palestine and Afghanistan and other, the conflict zones and areas, that we have many challenges, and sometimes we feel that we are rather bewildered and baffled, and we are lagging behind to just cater the needs of the current status of the humanity, even United Nations and other platforms in the world. So how do you think that you have specifically mentioned the ways to counter these particular challenges we have been facing so far?
Thank you very much for this question. One of the things I talk about in my book as an innovative tool to look at some of these conflicts is called theo-diplomacy.
Okay.
So what that means is that, obviously I've touched on Islamic law and international law.
Okay.
Theo-diplomacy is, in many of these theaters,
Okay.
you're not just dealing with Islamic law,
Mm-hmm.
you are dealing with people from other faith traditions.
Yeah. Very
So
right.
you have examples of Palestine, Israel,
Mm-hmm.
you have the Jewish tradition, you have the Christian tradition, and you have people from the Islamic faith tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to go into that theater, just using the Islamic model as a tool, that will not be very effective in itself as a resolution. So what I state is, sometimes in these models, you have absolutist principles, which is absolutist principles that you are, this is right or this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is the way to kind of deal with these things.
Yes.
That doesn't work in theaters like Palestine, Israel.
Okay.
What you need to have is the holistic methodology of conflict resolution in those theaters.
Okay.
And through that mechanism, what you do is you bring the high-rise ethics and principles from these traditions, which incline towards peace and reconciliation, and you use those as a tool. Another very important thing to mention is
Very
that,
right.
sadly, in places like Palestine, Israel, there are a lot of actors who use religion as a tool
Yeah.
to justify what they're doing.
Yes.
But it's usually a misrepresentation of religion.
Yes.
And
very
what
right.
I advocate is that you need to have a check and balance. You need to have authoritative bodies, and I'll mention this towards the end, that sit and are able to help facilitate and check upon these individuals who claim to represent religion, but they do have no grounding and authority with a lot of people from those traditions. And this is where you get into extreme narratives, which is sadly we are seeing today with the far right in Israel today, and some of the things that they're doing. A lot of mainstream people of faith will not subscribe to their viewpoints or, at all. So that's something which is very much with Palestine and Israel. When it comes to Kashmir, the situation in Kashmir, you have other groups. You have Hindus, you have Sikhs, you have, multiple Christians. So again, the point I make with theo-diplomacy is that I talk about an international peace and reconciliation commission
Okay.
to be set up at the United Nations. And what that commission will do is you'll have representatives from senior religious representatives
Okay.
from all the key traditions. So just to give an example, Jami al-Azhar, the Sheikhs of Jami
Very
al-Qum,
right.
from the seminaries in Iran, the senior clergy, senior priest, senior representative from the Hindu faith traditions, the Sikh faith tradition.
Yes.
And what they will do is they will act as a facilitator. They don't have to always be involved, but they're there to advise and give counsel as part of the negotiation. So for any individual or group that comes along, so for example, today in India, we have the rise of the the RSS,
Yes.
with the Modi and all the toxic narrative that's been created. Such narratives will not be given traction
Okay.
when it comes to negotiating because, because of the fact that they're causing a lot of division and discord.
Okay.
So this is something which will help check that and as a balance for that particular scenario. This
Yes.
is something which I mentioned for these two scenarios. I mean, I can touch on Afghanistan if you wish, but I'll stop there for now. Yeah.
Okay. So very, hectic and very painstaking job that you have rendered rather while writing this book, because we have gone through the great book that we have read in our youth, that is The Clash of Civilizations by Samuel Huntington. Okay, that lot many debate and discussions have been made so far, and as well as gone through by the Chomsky's understanding with the dissidents being at America, USA, and lot many other great literaries of time, that they have shown their compassion towards the atrocities and pogrom and the massacre any in the conflict zones of the world. But particularly that the cultural factors that we have, that you mentioned about the jirga and the understanding with Afghanistan and the Muslim countries as well, because to sit down and to just find the resolutions and creating some good attitudes and behaviors as well for between the parties as well. So to promoting peace and reconciliation in conflict zone is how much is significant at this juncture, the critical juncture that we have Ukraine issue, and lot many innocent lives have been just sacrificed for so-called these things. So do you think that this is a game changer book, that is the peace and reconciliation and international relation and Islamic law as well?
Thank you very much. One thing I would mention is, in terms of international relations discourse, a lot of scholars and authorities have written a lot of books on, peace and reconciliation as a topic.
Yes,
universities provide, courses on this topic. I think where my book could be of benefit for people is that in situations like Afghanistan you talked about, you have a situation in Islamic law called urf,
okay,
which is our customary norms and traditions within countries. And, what Islamic law does not do is have a vertical implementation.
Okay.
It's not a top-down implementation. It's a holistic mechanism.
Okay.
So sadly, with groups like the Taliban and what they're doing in Afghanistan, is they try to implement a vertical implementation.
Yes.
So things like the rights for education, which is a fundamental human right in Islam, it's a fundamental human right in international law. Everybody, in contemporary society knows that women have the right to education.
Yes.
But sadly, for whatever reason, the Taliban are not allowing women to, go and get educated. So this is something which is, embedded within the kind of rubric of that society. And
yes.
this is where my proposal for an International Peace and Reconciliation Commission could help, is that when organizations such as these come forward and state that women are not allowed to be educated, we will have scholars from Jamia al-Azhar, scholars from the seminaries of Qum, scholars from the major faith traditions saying, what is your source?
Yeah.
What is if you are claiming to represent Islam, what is your source to justify what you're doing? And that will act as a check and a balance for such organizations in that situation. But to answer your question around the situation, obviously, what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, any conflict of this nature is uncalled for. And you try to prevent it, preventative mechanisms before you even get to that stage. So before the conflict started in Ukraine, a lot of international politicians, diplomats gone to see Putin to try to stop him in engaging in this. And I'm sure we're all familiar with what happened in Pakistan. Imran Khan, obviously, and his delegation also went to see Putin. But, he decided to go and intervene. And the ramifications of that, that intervention have been cataclysmic globally. The cost of living crisis, energy crisis, geosecurity. It's changed the dynamics of the world in terms of how we look at things. Climate change impact too. So, these conflicts have not only impact in the region in where they're affecting, but they have global ramifications. And this is something which we, need to be conscious of in this global village that we live in today, that it is no longer a conflict in a certain corner of the world and it's got nothing to do with me. The global village that we live in, the ripple effect, the online social media, and the interconnectivity around this region means that this impacts people all over the world. So I think where my book will be of help is the models which I talk about in terms of how to go about dealing with conflicts. And the key thing I would like to reiterate is that this is not absolutist. There are no hard and fast rules. It's holistic in nature. And you have to, there's a principle in international law called subsidiarity. Proportionality. So you look at the situation in the context, and then you find a resolution as the best way to go forward to help deal with these things. And you talked about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and we've had recent initiatives within the kind of globally too,
Yeah.
such as the Common Word Initiative. We recently had the Charter of Mecca,
Yeah.
the Muslim World League also.
Yes.
These are all initiatives that are trying to build bridges across different guises to help people come towards a common understanding on the same table.
Yes, very right. Very comprehensive understanding about the futuristic solutions of the conflicts. And, in my youth, I have gone through the Islamic jurisprudence by Sir Abdul Rahim and Islamic law by D.F. Mullah while in the civil services syllabus. But I think, and being a broadcaster, being a programmer, I think that the content that you have narrated and you have written in your book, certainly part of the syllabus in Pakistan and the conflict areas of the areas that we have mentioned so far in Palestine, Kashmir, and any other area, because the Islamic law has given a great significant importance towards these things, because compassion, humility, tranquility, peace building are the very epitome and the very positive thing that we have ever seen. And thank you very much for writing this book for the rest of the world, so that we must inculcate the very positive things, the good scenario, and the positive rapprochement for the rest of the world to reconcile and to create peace and harmony and the mutual understanding between the cults, clans, regions, races, and as well. I think that I thank you very much from the studios of podcast for your very precious time that you have bestowed upon our persons, and you have talked very candidly about very futuristic things. And I hope so that time and again that we will again invite you and to talk upon this very historic, significant, very predominant topic. And we must all, the audience and the spectators of the podcast, Radio Pakistan, must inculcate the sanctity of understanding of all that. So I once again, Kaleem Hussain, thank you very much for your very precious time with us. And I'm sure that you will write like these sort of things and to spread the word of compassion, tranquility, love, humility as well, all times. And I must quote one thing in Urdu while having a very candid discussion with your very kind self, that in Urdu it's called Dekho Khushiyan Aise Banto, Sabka Hissa Ek Sa Ho. And that you have rendered something very magnum opus to that extent. I thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All the